Welcome to the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast.
Well, then Perez has got the better of it, and he looks to get the better of Schmeichel, and he's done it. Willis is going to fall here for Alexis. Henry, chance.
I'll bet you £50 million that Arsenal didn't have the striker they needed on Sunday. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith, and you can block me on Twitter at Yankee Gunner. That's right. £50 million will tell you that we probably could have used a better striker, but that's another topic that we will come to momentarily. First, I want to introduce the panel because it is a full boat, it is a full house, it is all the intellectual capacity we can muster, including myself. Tim is here. He is on Twitter at Silberto. Hello, Tim.
Hello.
Paul is here. Is on Twitter at Pausing in My Pants. That's the one. Hi, Pause.
Victory has many fathers. Defeat is an orphaned bastard.
And Clive is here. You can find Clive on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Hello, Clive.
I'll just stick with hello.
Hello, indeed. Scott will be along momentarily with a stat section that Paul has huge problems with because it takes a dim look at Francis Coquelin's involvement in the match. But that's not really our priority. Our priority for right now is to pick over the remains of a 3-1 defeat at Manchester City, a defeat that probably wasn't as shameful as some of us might have anticipated it would be, although, of course, I predicted a 4-3 win. The doomy one on the pod, who we call Tim, predicted a loss. So maybe it's best that we start with him. Tim, I want to sort of start with a holistic view of this, which is simply Manchester City look to be one of the most dominant good teams in the Premier League for many a year. They are probably worth the hype that they are getting. And so just before we get into the lineup, before we get into the specifics of the match, is it just fair to say that any analysis of this match at some level can be written off as we're clearly not in their league, no one thought we were in their league, and that overemphasizing this result or this performance is probably a mistake, whereas just writing it off as they're better than us might be the best way forward?
Broadly, yes, I do think that's the case. I don't think we played particularly badly. I think we had a plan, and it was a fairly decent one. It's just against Manchester City, you've got to be pretty much perfect, and we weren't terrible. I don't even think we were bad. It's just your mistakes are super magnified by this Manchester City team because they punish you for nearly every single one you make. So,
although they were a little bit profligate on the day, I mean, they definitely could have made it worse, to be fair.
Yeah, they could have. Do you know what it kind of reminded me of? When I was thinking about this, I was thinking, I wonder if like Stoke and Bournemouth fans, when they get beat at the Emirates, come away and like pour over the tactical decisions of the manager and think, or whether they just go, yeah, well, we're expecting that. They're better than us. We needed a perfect performance and a bit of luck, and we didn't get it. And never mind. Maybe one time out of 10, we kind of win this game. But and also really. Well, I say this like it's some kind of controversial statement. I mean, we were never in the title race. So in terms of losing ground on Manchester City, that doesn't matter. Really, I don't sense that anyone really believes that matters. We are in a fight for the top four. And so the really important games, and that doesn't mean you can just toss away points, obviously, but, getting anything out of this would have been a massive bonus. The Spurs game, the Man United game, coming up at home, those are the ones really that will have a massive bearing on where we finish this season. We've kind of got Man City away and Chelsea away out of the way now, which is and Liverpool away out of the way, which is kind of a good thing. We're kind of still waiting for our front three to really click as individuals and as and when they play together a bit more as a kind of trio. So in some respect, yes, I think as fans, we probably should look at it that way. Obviously, the team should do some analysis on what went wrong and where their mistakes were. But broadly, we were searching for the perfect game, and we got an okay game out of our players, which is just not going to be enough. And I think you're right. I think City, I think there was more in this than 3-1, really. I think City really could have come out of... We're really in second gear for a lot of the game because they had it won, quite frankly. So yeah, but they'll do that to a lot of teams, and I think that they're going to be kind of the best champions we've seen in England for probably since Mourinho's first Chelsea team. The most convincing champions I think we'll have seen in over a decade.
Yeah, and the reason I start there is because we're going to break this down at every level and talk about incidents and talk about decisions and talk about, maybe some of the things that frustrate us with those decisions. But I think there is an argument to be said, and then you know what? Have an international break, take the 2 weeks off, wash this game out of your memory, and move on as though it never happened, because the danger of drawing conclusions from this game and starting to change your squad and change your system and do things differently is that we aren't coming up against Manchester City every week. So we need to stick with the tactics that work against the 18 other teams, right? Not the one outlier team. And that would be my concern, is if we look at this game as instructive, when really it's probably more of a one-off, if you follow what I'm saying. So, Paul, having said that, the manager did make some odd decisions, and we'll get to them individually, the Coquelin decision and the Iwobi decision. But from what you could see, obviously making those choices meant that he had a way of playing in mind, or a way he wanted us to play in this match. Since I'm not totally sure what it was, how would you describe what you think the plan was out of the gate?
Okay. So I think your and Tim's conversation is spot on so far. But I will make a little bit of a case for the defense, if you know what I mean, even though I know my client's guilty. Yeah, I know. I'm admitting my client's guilty. Don't get me wrong. So, yeah, it was a squirrely kind of lineup. We know Per wasn't available, so Cock got put in the middle. You do a very nice section with Scott. And one of the things he covers is that we kind of closed them down, relatively speaking, in the box. We had 5 across the back, and basically we pushed them out to the sides, and at no stage did they penetrate us down the middle, apart from when Ramsey stepped out into a 1-2 and De Bruyne stepped around him and shot from distance. So I think that basic tactic of holding the centre was successful. In terms of our own game, of course, that left the wings open, and they certainly penetrated down those a couple of times, but they were going to do that against anybody. Short of changing formation, it was what it was, and the manager explained why he didn't want to just do that for a one-off game, and I think that makes some sense. In previous games we've seen, in recent times, our way of attacking is down the wings. Look at our last game. And the last Premier League game, and our pass patterns are down the wings. That's how we attack. In this particular game, we'd Özil and Iwobi, and again, you and Scott talk about Iwobi's role. I think when you're talking about that, I think it's a little harsh on Iwobi in the sense that his role was really to mirror Özil. And so what's interesting is Iwobi is nominally on the left with Özil on the right, but actually in an attacking sense, Özil switches to the left in the final third very often, and Iwobi complements that. So when you look at their touch patterns, they're almost an X diagram where Iwobi's defending one side but attacking almost across the diagonal, and very similarly with Özil, where Ozil's going over to Sanchez's favourite area and meeting up with Kolasinac. So another thing you highlight with Scott is that our most touches in the final third is Kolasinac and in the box, and I don't think that's either bad or indicative of something going against plan. I think that's very much plan, and in some ways was our most effective outlet. So we can debate Lacazette and Sanchez, and I certainly get that, but I can see why the manager felt he had to play Sanchez and Özil, and if he was going to play those two players, he didn't want to also play Lacazette, who can come across as a little quiet in the final third. So I don't think he wanted those three players with one of them being a giveaway machine and one of them being Özil, and potentially have two somewhat quiet players within the game and Sanchez giving the ball away. So he made a compromise, stuck Sanchez up front, where if he turned the ball over, and he did, there was at least coverage behind it. And, of course, there were things about it. In a way, it was a question of stemming the blood flow, and to some degree it did that. It was somewhat effective going forward, but as we've said, this is City, and they were going to hurt us in the attacking third for us when we were attacking them, and to some degree in midfield, or to a large degree in midfield, they were going to overwhelm us, and they did. So yeah, I think completely. It was a compromise.
Yeah, that's fair. Look, I do want to reference that the stat section, which Paul has brought up a few times. You, dear listener, have not heard it yet. Paul has, hence his ability to reference it. It is coming, I assure you. The sensible, intellectual, concrete part of the podcast is coming. But before that, we need to talk to Clive. Clive, I think you cannot go any further in analyzing this game without diving into the two interesting selection issues. One of them is Francis Coquelin. I find that one less interesting because in light of the fact that it sounds like Per Mertesacker was ill and the manager didn't have a lot of time to make a decision about what to do, and he went with Coquelin. I mean, we can decide whether it should have been El Neni or whether it should have been someone else, but it seems like sort of a straight swap, just a weird choice of who to swap with. But the Iwobi for Lacazette decision is big, and I want to talk about it with you for two reasons. One, you predicted it, so kudos to you. Two, I think it was fucking horrible. So, defend yourself, Clive. Why did you come up with this terrible solution?
I thought Iwobi would play, but I thought it was a toss-up between Lacazette and Özil, and I just suddenly felt, because Lacazette is quite low touch, that when he goes away from home, he will drop him. And we sort of, myself and Tim, we sort of pleaded that we would be Arsenal. Whatever happened, win or lose, we'd be Arsenal. And even in our subconscious, in the preview pod, I was thinking he's going to do something. He's going to do something, because that's what he does sometimes. When he comes to a big moment of stress, he overcoaches. And I think we've had 3 big games so far this year against Liverpool, Chelsea and City. And I felt the approach to one was correct. We got a 0-0 draw. And the approach to the others were not so good. And what I mean by that is we don't approach the game with any sort of serenity of a big club, of an elite club. We approach the game,
here's our team, it's good enough, we're going to put it out there. Okay.
Exactly. We've been building towards this front three. We know they've got weaknesses, but they've got massive strengths. So you need to say, let's be Arsenal, let's go out there and say, this is what we're about. If you're going to, I think maybe if Welbeck was fit, I think he would have played. I think the most intense front three is Lacazette, Welbeck and Sanchez. And if I'd like those three to be playing in these sort of Northwest games, if I'm honest with you. But I just knew that was going to happen. And this is my issue with the manager, really. He's not bringing composure and assurance to the club. So he is our stewardess. He's the air steward. When you're on the plane and you go through turbulence, you have a quick look at the air steward. And if she's standing there and she's cool, you're cool. If she's standing there and she gets scared, you think to yourself, well, she's been on this flight every single day. If she's scared, this is a bad one, right? And when we go to these big games, I look at our manager and he does not reek assurance. His selection reeks of reaching, and it doesn't give confidence. And I thought we played like a championship team in an FA Cup game against a Premiership team.
So in other words, plenty of effort, not a lot of quality?
Not a lot of assurance. Yeah. Is that the right word?
Confidence.
A real certainty. Mm-hmm. Certainty.
Self-belief.
We dance around the ball a bit. We overhit our passes. We smash some shots over the bar. And we're better than this. We didn't look technically relaxed. We looked technically nervous and insecure. And then you talk about the physicality side, and I felt we were out-intensed. I do think it was competitive, but only competitive because City were on the back of a European game and they were a little bit tired. I thought, I didn't get the game live. I watched it second time around and I thought the game was quite flat. I thought they were jogging and we were jogging, thinking, oh, we're quite close here for a little bit. But I didn't think there was a certainty that we're going to display our quality. And so I go back to the manager again. I feel he's doing what he can do sometimes to people's careers. Lacazette, he's creating an issue here when there is not one. And now suddenly we've got a problem with our next flagship player. And you heard me talk about he's the one we needs to be recruiting for us. If he goes away with international duty and all these French mates say, what's it like at Arsenal? What's he going to say?
You get benched for the big games and play 60 minutes in the other ones?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, come along. Yeah, come. It's all good there. You know, they've got a clear mind what they're doing, a clear philosophy, a clear strategy, a clear playing plan. The manager's great. He really overcoaches us. We're so well instructed. Yeah, come to Arsenal. I mean,
I don't
that's
think
the thing that worries me.
Well,
that's the thing that worries me.
Here's my problem. Okay, ultimately, you guys, this is the reality of football. Goals are rare. May not seem like it against us always, but goals are rare, and goals are hard to score, and goals win games. And because goals win games, strikers cost 9 figures. At the end of the day, the one player you don't rotate out of a squad for tactical reasons is the guy you most trust to score goals, because no matter how ill-suited you may feel he is to the game, goals win games. Goals change games. Goals affect games. Look what happened when Lacazette comes on. He converts one little half chance into a nifty goal. By the way, I think that shot was something like a 0.2 or 0.25 or 0.05, 0.05 XG, and he converts it brilliantly. And what happened after that? City got a little bit of the shits up them for a bit. The game opened up. It looked like maybe we were in it when we really hadn't been most of the game. Goals win games.
Could I give you a quick counter?
I mean, I expected it, but yeah, sure. Why not throw it in now?
Right. Well, firstly, the manager's talked a few times about Lacazette still not quite having the intensity for the Premier League, and this was a game in which he was going to get absolutely surrounded and battered and bruised, as Alexis was by John Stones for pretty much the whole game, largely unpunished. So that was part of his concern. The other thing is he brought him on with about a little over 30 minutes to go, and he scored a goal. The other aspect of it, and we'll talk about stats later on, and where we suffered by comparison, but one of the areas we did rather well in the stats is XG, all the way up until that penalty. Now, I saw the same game you did. Certainly, City deserved to be ahead, and at the end of the day, I don't think the score was in any way unfair to us, but the manager has a point, and we were well in this game, that a couple of decisions, one of them particularly unfair, kill this game off. We were well in this, and in that sense, had we not had that offside against us, the manager, you could argue, against City at their home, the best team in Europe, we were well in this, even with his Lacazette choice, and maybe because of his Lacazette choice. I
mean, here's what I would say, and again, it's not that I'm saying you're wrong. Just my opinion is different. My opinion is that we weren't in it until Lacazette came on and scored that goal. But prior to that, well, a few things. De Bruyne has a chance to slip, I think it was Sterling, an easy pass he makes all day long, every day, one-on-one with the keeper, doesn't do it. Sterling tripped over the ball a few times on the counterattack. They had several counterattacks where they were in wide positions, 3-on-1s and 2-on-1s, and made the wrong pass. I mean, they were uncharacteristically sloppy with their final ball in the final third, and I think it would have been,
as you mentioned, goals are hard to score.
Well, right,
you're talking about a lot of nearlies.
No, I know, but Paul,
isn't that what XG catches?
Yeah, well, no, it doesn't, because it's a shot-based model. But or at least the ones we looked at. So those positions didn't lead to shots. Look, what I'm saying is, if you decide I'm going to go spend, and look, I know $50 million isn't that much anymore, but if you say center forward's a priority, I'm going to go get a center forward that's going to be my guy. That's going to be the position I've needed, the starting striker I need. There has never been a period in Arsene Wenger's career when he had a striker he believed in. He has never, ever rotated him out for tactical reasons. He never rotated out Van Persie. He never rotated Henry.
Do it every season. Wenger buys a player, he brings him in gradually, and you can't understand why he isn't starting him. He did this with Xhaka last year. Do you remember?
I mean,
you were
Paul,
having a meltdown every bloody game, saying,
it's November. It's a big game. You spent $50 million on him. He's a striker. Put him out there to score goals. He's played enough. The training wheels have to come off.
Elliot, check whether Xhaka got played every game in November. or even in the big games.
But Paul, here's the point. What are we waiting for? Like the season is a quarter of the way done, or a third of the way done. What are we doing? Building him up for next season? We bought him to use him this season. If you wait till December to start playing him in big games, it's too late. It's too late.
By his assessment, he doesn't think he's fully robust enough for this game. He might have been right. He brought him on at 50-something minutes. He scored a goal. We were well in it, whether you like it or not.
What does well in it mean? I mean,
we were a goal down. We were a goal down. We were
playing poorly and overwhelmed by a team
that... We weren't playing poorly. As we've already said, given who we were against, this is just reality. To be a goal down against City with 20-something minutes to go, and as you said, you wanted Lacazette on. He was on against fresh legs. We absolutely could have got another goal with Lacazette. You make a great point. He's exactly who you want on the pitch. He was with fresh legs. We could easily have drawn this game. We wouldn't have. They'd eventually beaten us like they beat everybody else. They haven't been beaten at home for feckin' ever. They've won every game at home. So what are you going to do?
I get it. Look,
we were well in it.
My first of all, I think part of the problem is Alexis and Özil had really poor games and they really struggled. And so there's some question as to the impact of making the change, of Iwobi coming on, of pushing Alexis forward into that position where he was very isolated and had to do a lot on his own. I mean, Tim, why don't you jump in and sort of settle the argument a little bit? I mean, I don't think any of us have a problem with Coquelin dropping in as a center back. I mean, it's a straight swap, albeit a weird one. And if you want to sort of opine briefly on what you think of Coquelin getting the call for that position, I'd be happy to hear it. As far as the Lacazette decision, I mean, what is your opinion on bringing in a guy to be your striker and making the tactical decision not to use him in big games?
I kind of got it, to be honest, and that's not to say I definitely agreed with it, but I got it in terms of, for this game, if he clearly at the moment doesn't think that Lacazette can play 90 minutes in the Premier League at the moment in terms of intensity. And so he had two choices here. First of all, he obviously wasn't quite brave enough to go with Alexis, Özil and Lacazette. And, you know, if you've got to drop one of them, Lacazette's probably the easiest one at the moment to drop of those three. Maybe Özil is, but I think he wanted to give Özil another chance, and especially the way Özil performed at Everton.
Why do you think Lacazette's the easiest one?
Yeah, especially given the other two are about out the door, right?
Yeah, just because he doesn't really get that involved in the game, but also it's largely on the physical side because Wenger hasn't played him for 90 minutes since the first day of the season, so that tells you he doesn't think he can play that long. So I think Arsene probably thought, when would I rather have him, for the first hour or for the last half an hour of the game? And particularly when City played, away at Napoli, he probably thought, if we can just stay in it and even if we're a goal down, kind of on 60 minutes, then I bring him on when perhaps City are tiring. So I think there was that side of it. I don't think that was the whole thing. And then I think he just wasn't quite brave enough to go with Alexis, Özil and Lacazette. He wanted Iwobi in there because Iwobi did a pretty decent defensive job against Chelsea. I don't think he repeated that defensive job on this occasion. He kind of cost us a goal, really. Well, a few players cost us that first goal, but he kind of gave the ball away. That said, for Lacazette's goal, it all comes from Iwobi doing precisely what he was picked for, where he beautifully receives the ball off the defence, opens his body out, sells De Bruyne down the river, and he was there to kind of try and carry the ball and for a bit of technical assurance. And perhaps a bit of physical power as well. I don't think that really worked, but I think that was the logic behind it. And just at the moment, if this is still happening in like February, that Lacazette is not playing, say when we go to Spurs in February, if Lacazette's dropped for that game, yeah, that really tells you something. I really take Paul's point, though, that quite often, particularly when Arsene signs a player from another league, he does do this. Henry...
Can I just stop you just for 1 second, though? Oh, okay. Just because he does this doesn't mean it's right. I mean, do you think it... Do you think it's the right... I mean, just real quick, and again, just because someone else does it doesn't mean it's right either, but you look at Alvaro Morata at Chelsea, and he's a difference maker for them, and he's been playing since his boots hit the ground in England, right?
but I think he's been really inconsistent, don't you think? I've seen some good performances. I've seen some totally indifferent performances from him as well,
he missed a
including
few
the game
games,
against
didn't he?
us. He missed a couple of games, yeah, but I mean, right from the beginning, I think Lukaku as well at United, there's some games he's really on it and there's some games he's really, really not. I've seen a couple of Chelsea games where I've just thought Morata looked a bit floundering. I've seen some where he looks brilliant. And I don't doubt that he's, the brilliant games are more representative of his quality, and that's more what he'll show over time. But I do think he's been a little bit up and down.
Fair enough.
Probably as Lacazette has. And yeah, Arsene does do this with particularly with forward players as well. Henry didn't make that transition till kind of late November. I mean, Van Persie probably different because we signed him quite young. Quite a lot of these players kind of go through this. As for the just kind of quick thoughts on the centre half, I mean, I think he had a real choice between Coquelin and Elneny. And on one hand, I think what he'd really like to have done is just been able to clone the two players, because I think he went with Coquelin probably because he has that aggressiveness and he wanted someone up Aguero's backside to stop him turning on the edge of the box, and particularly Aguero likes to turn and slip in the two inside forwards, and I think he wanted someone to kind of really aggressively attack the ball, and actually Coquelin did that very, very well. If you look at his interception stats, his tackling stats, very, very good. But obviously the problem he gives you is you can't play out of the back, whereas Elneny can. And I think something like 80% of Czech's passes were long balls in the end, because City squeezed us up, and you can't pass to Coquelin in that kind of environment, whereas you probably can pass to Elneny. And I think Wenger showed in pre-season. I mean, 1 minute he was really enthusiastic about the Elneny project at centre-half. Then did we play Atletico Madrid in the Emirates Cup? And that was almost like, well, here's your big defensive test. And he was found a bit wanting. And all of a sudden, Wenger said, yeah, he's not a centre-back. He'll never play there. Whereas, playing in the Europa League when we're dominating possession, slightly different. But I think for a game like this, where we were going to come under a lot of pressure, he wanted a kind of more aggressive defensive type. But at the same time, we really missed someone to play out the back. So, but overall, I think really, as much as we go into the granular tactical detail, Man City made 2 changes from their last lineup. They brought in Kyle Walker and I forget the second player they brought in. It might have been Leroy Sané. Arsenal made 2 changes from their last lineup. They brought in Iwobi and Coquelin, and that's the difference, really. City brought in a couple of players who'd fetch 50 million in the transfer market, and we brought in a young kid who's developing and a utility player.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we did have one of the guys that we could have played was 50, but again, not to belabor the point. So, Clive, real quick, I mean, because I want to move on. I want to get Scott's statistical analysis of it so we can dive into a little more of the granular detail that Tim referenced. But I mean, for me, and look, I realize I'm here to be the hysterical irritant that sparks debate. So I'm doing the job the best I can. But like,
you're doing very well, my friend.
Thanks, sir.
Very well.
I am of the opinion that like the era of like building a team over decades is gone, and that like each individual season has value, and the season has to be approached as its own experience, and that we needed a striker to lead the line for us and get us goals. And my problem here is I never felt we were going to keep a clean sheet. I don't think any of us would have expected that. And by the way, any analysis I'm making here, I want to remind everybody, I don't think there's any humiliation in losing to an exceptional City side. We started the whole conversation with Tim and I discussing that. But I think when you have only Alexis toiling by himself up front, the 2 things we know are, one is he's going to get disconnected from the other departments. He's going to get frustrated. He's going to be trying to do too much on his own. He's not going to have anyone to link up with. But also, he's the only guy you really trust to score a goal. And in a game where you expect you're probably going to concede 1 or 2, I think you need that extra goal-scoring option, that extra threat. And we didn't have it. I mean, the last word on the decision not to start Lacazette?
Yeah, I think it's down. We're debating it now, and Tim and Paul have given a good sort of historical view of how he approaches these situations.
Yeah, I don't think so.
The reason why we're debating it vociferously is we don't trust him like we used to do. When he used to do it, no one questioned him.
He's lost the benefit of the doubt, right?
But now we question him. I can see why, I can see why he wanted to play Coquelin. But you know what? There's a hierarchy in the dressing room. There's a pecking order. He played one player in centre of the defence multiple times. The moment came in a big game where we had to bring somebody else in, and he put somebody there for his first ever game, and that person only touched the ball 29 times. So we can't be Arsenal. We can't play. We can't play amongst our back three. We can't get a breather. We just turn the ball over regularly, and our gaps between our lines are getting bigger, and we are getting passed around. And that was a problem. We couldn't get out. Because we were tired. So we took a decision to press and tackle. But really, we're Arsenal. We play the ball. We have more touches than we normally do. So I would have gone the other way just because he's had experience. Right? But the thing is, why we're debating it so hard is we don't trust him the same. When the lineup comes out, we all raise our eyes and think, what are we doing now? And with the centre forward, again, there's an argument for it. But I was hoping he wouldn't do it. I was hoping he'd say, come on, this is what we are. We built up to this. I've eased him into it. This is the big moment. And no, he didn't play him. And I thought, oh, man, come on, trust yourself. Trust yourself. Believe in yourself. Believe in your philosophy. Don't be nervous. Don't be stressed. Make them worried. And I felt we just made them more assured. And I think it was a very, very bad decision. And I also think, Tim, is why I asked Tim the question, why do you think he dropped Lacazette? I actually think he was the easiest to drop because there'll be less confrontation.
He definitely avoids confrontation now. There's just no question in my mind he does that.
He didn't want to drop Özil because of the headlines. He didn't want to drop Sanchez because of the headlines. But he could drop the new boy. He could find an excuse to say he's not quite there yet. Well, the new boy scored 6 goals this season. He's our top goal scorer. He's doing the business. Judge him on the metrics that really, really count.
Top goal scorer by 3 goals. And I realize Alexis hasn't played that much yet.
Conversion, goals. Judge him by what you bought him for. Don't judge him. Similar to what we did at Anfield, we made a nice decision because it was less confrontational. I think he's betraying his own philosophy by doing that, or even having the thought process amongst ourselves that we believe that because we've seen it before, and that could happen. The fact I even can think it tells me he's doing something wrong, and I'd like to see him be a little bit stronger in his own beliefs and manage players appropriately when they do well and when they don't. Yeah,
Paul, I want to give you the last word on this before we go to Scott's section and just say, preface this by saying, I think you referenced, that maybe Lacazette would have gotten physically beat up a little by Stones, or, maybe he doesn't feel he's ready, or, whatever the issues are. But, I guess my question is, what's the worst thing that can happen? Look, if you play a midfielder who's not ready, it can blow up your entire game. If you play a defender who's not ready, it can blow up your entire game. The great thing about a striker is he's kind of there, especially in a game where you're going to be pinned back quite a bit. It's one thing when you're trying to unlock a packed defense and you have 70% of the ball, but when you know that's not going to be the case and you might have a few chances and you need to convert them, I guess what I would say to you, Paul, is what's the downside to throwing him in the deep end in this game? He is your leading goal scorer. He is the best finisher you have at the club. He's the guy who you paid $50 million for those qualities. What is the downside to throwing him in the deep end there? What's the worst thing that happens? He doesn't succeed in that situation. That's what he's there for, to sink or swim in these big games, right?
Yeah, but what's the manager there to do? He's there to make big decisions.
I get it. I'm saying, what's the downside? Again, of course. I'm saying, what's the downside? The
downside to playing him is he then has Lacazette, Sanchez, and Özil as his front three, which is very likely to put an ungodly amount of pressure on those players behind. There's a reason why Iwobi's touches were counter-diagonal to his starting position. He was balancing out Özil. That's what Iwobi allowed him to do. We talked about judging things on stats and goals, and Lacazette has proven this, that, and the other. Well, let's judge the game on stats and goals. We were within 1 until a shitty offside goal. So if you want to do that, you got to say being within one and having the flow of the game coming back in your direction, having Lacazette on with fresh legs, you can say it was kind of working. Now,
I follow. Look, and I don't totally disagree with that. But again, I point to the Liverpool game, for example. Early in that Liverpool game,
don't point to the Liverpool game. It's an absolute anomaly.
I know, but
go ahead,
Paul. Because I'm pointing to it for a different reason. I'm not. There were all the issues in that game. I understand that, but what I'm saying is, early in that game, we created the first chance, the first real clear chance, and it fell to Welbeck, and he didn't convert from a fairly quality position to score a goal. And if it's Lacazette, and if he converts it, and if it's 1-0 to the Arsenal, I mean, do we then go on to lose 4-1? I mean, I'm not trying to write revisionist history. I'm saying it's an area of the pitch in the big games where the ability to convert your chances is amplified many, many, many times over, right?
Yeah, but aren't you the one, no offense meant, Elliot, who even this season keeps saying that you love Alexis up front?
Well, no. I have always said I love Alexis up front for a variety of reasons. One, I think it minimizes our downside.
You think it's his best position?
Well, I think it's been his best position for us prior to, remember, up until 2 games ago, I had never seen Alexis, Ozil, and Lacazette together. I think since Lacazette has arrived, I have been, I think, pretty consistent in saying I want to see Alexis, Ozil, and Lacazette, and anything our season is going to amount to is going to depend on those 3 playing together. So it's not that I don't like Alexis up front, because I do. It's that I think we have a superior. It's been my preferred position before Lacazette arrived. But what I'm saying is, with Lacazette available for selection, my preference is that those 3 play, because I think they are our 3 most skillful players. They are our 3 best attacking options. It gives us the most chance to score a goal.
Sure, and in general, that's true. But in a point of the season and against a team where we're going to be starved, we're never going to be more pressed in the attacking third by another team than we are against City. And you're going to put those 3 players, Ozil and Lacazette, who can be almost invisible, even though they have a few quality touches in the game, and the giveaway merchant, Sanchez. And you don't think our midfield is going to be absolutely battered beyond what it was?
Well, I'd turn to Tim in that respect and say that I think what Tim said in the last pod, and I realize that you were not available for that due to your Walgreens commitments, but I think Tim had said I'd play those 3 and cut them loose up the pitch and kind of disconnect them in a way and try to bypass the press and play it to those guys and let them use the space they find behind the press. And again, it's all theoretical, Paul. I fully acknowledge that plan may not have worked. I'm just saying that's the plan I liked conceptually. Let's move on, because we could debate this for an hour and we have so much more to get to. We're going to go to Scott, then Tim. I want to ask you about the start of the game. So let's get Tim's thoughts on the statistical side of the game, including some unflattering things about Francis Coquelin. I'm sorry, Paul. And then we'll come right back. Now, it's true, you may not need data to tell you that Francis Coquelin is not the second coming of Lionel Messi, but data can help us understand the match, and that's why Scott's here. Scott is on Twitter at @O_that_crab. You can find his statistical analysis, his brilliance, his carefully curated information is on crabstats.blogspot.com. And Scott, it is a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, first things first, I thought this was kind of a shit sandwich, but there's some evidence that maybe we had more success against City than their competition. So let's start with that. Statistically, where did we excel, or in quotes, excel, in ways that maybe the City's opponents have not been excelling this season?
Yeah, all in all, it wasn't a great game, and you look at the XG, and it was a lot closer, flattering. You'll talk about that later, and I'm sure everybody's seen it by now. But the one thing that was a little bit more surprising to me was if you look at the touches, the final third touches specifically, that was actually fairly close. Manchester City had 157, Arsenal 144, and surprisingly, this was Manchester City's worst outing in terms of final third touches and 18-yard box touches, with 27 for the 18-yard box. So
is that by a lot? Well. I mean, were they just under their average, under the lowest of the season? How far below their usual performance were they?
Quite a bit. They average, I believe, 35 a game. So this is a pretty good deviation. I think last week they had something ridiculous like 45. So
touches in the box. Wow.
Yes.
And how many again did they have against us?
27.
Okay, so we, at least compared to them, kept them out of the box at a rate that they're not used to, but vis-a-vis what we're used to, which is probably more relevant because obviously they're not playing quality teams like Arsenal every week. This wasn't such a hot shit performance from us in terms of the amount we allowed vis-a-vis our performance, right?
Exactly. No, and this is also the worst that Arsenal have done this year, tied with the Liverpool match, which also
How did the Liverpool match go? I can't remember. We did really well there, right?
I think I've kind of expunged that one from my memory.
Okay, so in terms of their touches in our box, it's tied for our worst performance this season with the Liverpool match.
Yep.
Okay.
And both of those are quite a bit away from, the next highest, which was Watford at 21, which was another one that I've seemed to have forgotten about.
So while this tells us basically that City have been the juggernaut we think they have been, and maybe they weren't quite the juggernaut against us that they have been, they were a juggernaut as compared to what we've been used to experiencing this season. Now, the thing I think is interesting is you mentioned we were relatively close to them in final third touches, but since they dominated us in possession, where did they have the touch advantage? Where did we see a significant drop-off?
So it was in the middle third. They had 360 touches in the middle third compared to our 245. They also had a 50 touch advantage in the defensive third.
And that's the midfield. So in other words, I mean, essentially, while we were able to get it forward and get into their attacking third at times, we had no control of the midfield, and I think that's borne out by what we saw. But at the end of the day, if you're going to get it into their final third, at least on par with what they're doing, then you would expect you'd create more chances. That didn't happen, and the players who probably have to take responsibility for that, to some extent anyway, would be Özil and Alexis. Big game, big players. They're supposed to step up. It didn't seem like they stepped up, and from what you're seeing in the data, they most certainly did not.
Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, when you get that kind of touches and you have the two superstar players that you're going to depend on, you'd like to see more cutting edge. Combined, they only created 2 shots, and both of those were from Alexis. So Özil, who's supposed to be the world-class playmaker, didn't create anything, had just the one shot that he took. So he was pretty anonymous. Alexis had just the one shot, which is really quite the anomaly for him, and that was the really long free kick thing that he took that was, not well taken at all. And the other thing that was really quite surprising was how bad Özil was passing in the final third. He's normally one of the best passers in the final third in the league, actually in all of Europe, where he passes at almost 90%. Yesterday, he was at 50%, 9 of 18 overall. And Alexis isn't necessarily known for completing at a high percentage, but you usually expect him to create 1 or 2 moments of magic. But that didn't come off, and he was 9 of 17, so he still had the same tendencies of giving the ball away.
So when our star players got the ball in the final third, which they did with reasonable regularity, they didn't have their usual precision, their usual quality to deliver the ball the way they needed to, and obviously that leads to a paucity of chances. But I do wonder to some extent if Iwobi's presence there changes that. Obviously, Alexis playing isolated as the center forward, fewer runners for Özil to play it to. Out of curiosity, did Iwobi show up in the final third? Do you happen to have handy how he performed in that area of the pitch?
I do. One second. So Iwobi he wasn't the best player on the pitch, obviously, and I don't think I would have started him, but he ended up with 17 final third touches, which is the 4th highest. So Kolasinac led the team in final third touches, which is not usually your ideal thing.
Especially if you're worried about getting counterattacked on the flanks, but okay.
Yeah. And then Özil and Xhaka were second with 19, and then you find Iwobi and Alexis at 17.
So interesting. I mean, if you consider that the front three, so to speak, were Alexis, Özil, and Iwobi, Iwobi probably dropping a little deeper. Maybe that was by design, but certainly not getting into that final third and contributing in the way he could have. I mean, calling into question, again, obviously, something we'll get into a lot on this pod, the issue of whether Lacazette should have been starting. But, I mean, obviously, it wasn't the best day for Özil and Alexis. Francis Coquelin, a lot of people, I think, on social media and in general feel that while it was a weird choice, he wasn't the problem. But statistically, he had an epically poor performance. Regardless of what people think of his inclusion, what showed up in the stats is pretty abominable. Do you want to just sort of elaborate on how poor his performance was statistically?
Yeah, so I know we've talked about it on the pod previously. So my passing value added stat. So this is fairly new. So I've been collecting it since the beginning of this year, and I have it for all of Europe. And so Coquelin's number of 0.3, and that's correct. It's a negative number, so he was definitely not adding anything with his passing. And if we want to put some context on where that ranks,
negative 0.3.
Yes.
Okay, that's bad. That sounds bad. So how's that rank?
So there's been about 15,000 players so far that have made passes in the top 5 leagues, and this ranks at the 0.2 percentile. So he is so
it's one of the bottom performances. One of the bottom performances of the entire data collection period over what you said, 15,000 performances.
Yeah, so and a lot of the people that are going to be worse than him are going to be goalkeepers, and with goalkeepers, there's a lot of kick the ball long and not high completion percentages. So from a defender, this is pretty bad. I
mean, would you say arguably it may be the worst outfield performance in your database for that statistic?
I can't say for certain it's the worst.
It's going to be close.
It's going to be, yes, in the top 1% of worst performances.
What about your usual garden variety defender stats, headers, tackles, interceptions, that sort of thing?
So, yeah, he was 3 for 4 in tackling. Going back and watching it, I think at least 2 of those were on his own making for his own passes that he misplayed. So he had to go save himself. He was 0 for 1 on aerial duels. So, I mean, he's a short little guy, so you're not expecting him to create a lot of there. He had 1 clearance. I didn't see any interceptions in the stats. It was just, to me, not an all-around good day. If you want to even break down where his passing mistakes were, he was 5 of 9 in the defensive third, where normally you're going to see 95% passing there. So a 50% passing rate in the defensive third is absolutely abysmal. He was 10 of 14 in the middle third. So even there, you're expecting 80% plus. And yeah. The other part that's even worse is it's not like he was really just doing long passes, hoofing it out of there. It was 14 of 20 on short passes, so couldn't even do the short, simple ones to try to get it out of danger.
Yeah, and that's obviously really bad when you're sitting deep and those incompletions lead to you being under pressure immediately. So while Francis Coquelin to the eye may not have seemed like the problem, certainly statistically he put forth a performance befitting potentially not great player playing in a position he's not used to playing in against one of the best teams in Europe. Just want to finish really quickly with Granit Xhaka. I mean, so much focus on him this season, not been his best season. One thing, though, that I seem to notice about Xhaka is that when we are playing well, both on XG Chain and PPVA and some of those open play, build-up of play kind of statistics, he tends to be near or at the top for us, and not the case in this match, correct?
No, it was not his best match. Overall, he was at 84% passing, so it's a little bit better there.
That's
so that
uptick.
Kind of.
Do you think that? I mean, that could
things a little bit.
Impart maybe to the fact that there was a bit of an extra body in midfield, that Coquelin was stepping forward a little, that Iwobi was dropping back a little, and he had more than just the one option.
It definitely could have been.
Because I looked at the pass maps, and it looked like Ramsey also played a little bit more on level with him. They were on plane as opposed to clearly having one in front of the other.
And it definitely could have been the case, but it also, because of how far back City pushed us, the touch maps are going to be a little bit skewed that way. But yeah, I think it was, he had more people around him. But I think he was also not really progressing the ball very well because his passing value added was 0.02, which would be about the 40th percentile. So not a bad day, but definitely not with something that you'd want in a big game where you need one of your most expensive ever signings to contribute.
Yeah, and I mean, that would be among the worst games he's had in that statistic this season, I'm guessing, if not the worst.
Definitely, yes.
All right, so I mean, all in all, I mean, the positive, we got into their final third. We kept them out of our final third and box at a higher rate than they're used to. The negative is it's the most times we've allowed anyone to pass the ball in our area this season, along with the Liverpool defeat. And it sounds like some epically poor performances from our best players and not much better from our worst players. So all around, not a surprising result. Well, I guess it leaves it to the group to break down exactly what went wrong and rant and rave and do all the stuff that has no statistical analysis involved. So, Scott, I appreciate it. Scott's on Twitter at O_that_crab. You can find his fine work at crabstats.blogspot.com. And, Scott, enjoy the 2 weeks away from Arsenal. I think we all desperately need it. We'll talk to you after, I guess, the North London derby.
Yep.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks, man.
All right.
What have I become? My sweetest friend, everyone.
Okay, so that gives us a little bit of a statistical framework for discussing the game, but really I would rather just descend into hysterical debate and argument as soon as humanly possible. But Tim, the one thing that I think is interesting is we actually came out of the gates pretty well here. I mean, this game started about as well as we could have expected for, I don't know, what would you say, 15 minutes or so? Was there anything you saw us doing or that worked really well in the early stages that we stopped doing? Was it just that when they scored the goal, we were rocked mentally and didn't recover? Or was there something specific that we just weren't able to keep up with? Because it was a bright start to the game.
Yeah, it was. And full disclosure, I missed the first 5 minutes due to train delays.
Oh,
okay. But yeah, I thought the first kind of 10 to 15 minutes were very positive for us. I thought we had a game plan to kind of go into a 4-5-1 shape off the ball and try and keep those lines fairly compact and close to each other. And, you know, we know if City have a weakness, it's defensively. And you can see it as well. I was in the kind of third tier, so I had like a really good overall, I was quite high up, a quite overall view of City's shape, and they push up very, very high. And their defensive shape is not necessarily brilliant. It's not particularly rigid. They leave like a couple back, and they're not necessarily in a line. Otamendi and Stones. I still don't think that's a great partnership. And Fernandinho manfully tries to fill the gaps they leave. So they're not great going backwards. And actually, I think we kind of exploited that a little bit in the first 10 to 15 minutes. And there were a couple of times where we got in kind of between Kyle Walker and Otamendi on that side. And I think that's one of the reasons that playing Alexis up front, at least initially, you know, looked like it might make a bit of sense, because he really likes either being in that kind of position or playing the ball into it. And actually, probably our best chance of the half when we broke away and Ramsey had that shot. That was in that little kind of corridor of space, and I think we were really aiming for that. I think the kind of problem was we lost the press a little bit. It became a bit intermittent, a bit disorganised, whereas at first it was very, you know, Iwobi, Alexis, very, very on top of it. I think we kind of lost our way with that a bit. We lost a bit of faith in it when Man City really kind of got into the game and started controlling the ball. I was really disappointed in Özil in that respect, because I get really frustrated with Giroud because he's not even like bad at pressing. He just doesn't. He just does not do it. He will not do it. He just, even if a defender's 2-3 yards away from him, he won't close him down. He's got no interest in engaging in that side of the game. Özil, I think, can do that, and I think he can do that quite intelligently at times in a very subtle way. He kind of quit on it on the press off the ball, and I think he kind of cut Alexis and Iwobi adrift a little bit, and he became very, very easy to play around. And also, I think our fullbacks were up very, very high. And if you watch Adrian Clarke's breakdown of the game, which I really recommend, he kind of pointed this out. The fullbacks were up really high, and something that not just was happening on Sunday, a really, really repeat theme of this season is Arsenal giving the ball away stupidly in their own half. And we kept doing it again. And, Kolasinac and Bellerin were quite committed. But the reason they were committed is, I think, because we had such a positive start for the first 10 minutes or so. And they thought, we can make some hay here. And Bellerin was finding some space down that right flank. And he was perhaps just I don't know whether he was too keen to run into it or whether the kind of lack of technical assurance of his teammates let him down. But it's a familiar problem for Arsenal, and a really unusual one to have in an Arsene Wenger team. But we just don't have enough technical quality in the middle of the pitch, and it's really telling on us, and it told on us, and it robbed us, I think, of a good start because we just couldn't control and keep the ball.
Yeah, and it's not something we haven't seen before. I would suggest that there have been other big games we've come out of the gate pressing and energetic and not been able to sustain that for one reason or another. And I wonder if it's just because it's not something we practice enough and that we are drilled at enough to know how to do it over the course of a game, because it's also not as coordinated. It's very individualistic, right? I mean, if you watch the way City press, it's a coordinated movement, and it's very hard to get past. And Clive, one of the things that I feel like we tried to do is be a little bit over elaborate in our area, in our defensive third, and we tried to dribble around them a lot, and it didn't go very well. We were successful with something like half of our dribbles, a really low percentage of dribbles, and we tried a bunch and they didn't come off. And I mean, for you, is one of the things that we're just not doing enough at Arsenal right now generally, but did not do in this game, is one-touch, accurate, simple passes to one another. I think it's one of those things that seems so obvious, but the players aren't receiving the ball and giving the ball quickly, and they're not making themselves available enough for each other.
Yeah, and I always go on about physicality. That's my number one thing I always look for. But actually, Tim always brings me back to earth, and he talks about technical security. And this was a day for technical security, but technical security under pressure. Not under pressure from Everton, but under pressure from City that are coordinated. And that was the reason why I thought Iwobi would play, because he can give us that. He just didn't do it enough, right? He didn't do it enough. Özil didn't do it enough. Özil didn't take enough initiative. Alexi tried to take too much initiative, and that's where we were. That's where we were left with. There was one particular bit that really stood out for me it's a comparison between Kevin De Bruyne and Özil. So obviously on the goal, De Bruyne pops it off, goes round Ramsey, the centre backs are too deep, there's space there for him to have a touch, shift and hit, right? Goal. Through the legs, side netting. Bit unfortunate, a consequence of losing the ball, second effort, momentum, 1 yard away from where you should be. That's all you need for a shot. Goal.
It's an Iwobi giveaway that leads to that, by the way, and I know that's a little bit harsh on him,
and a Kolasinac giveaway as well, right? So, but it comes from multiple gives away in our own half. But that is why Iwobi was picked for. That's why I remember I told you about him driving, receiving and driving. He did it on the goal. He laid off a very sloppy pass and we got picked off, right? So, but there was a bit in the second half. I think it was a clearance from the right back side of the area, went straight over to Sanchez, a big long diagonal. He's done his normal, stand people up. He dribbled inside. It's swept back out to Özil on the right-hand corner of the area. Sanchez makes a run. 3 people follow him. I'm thinking, go on, son, step inside and hit it. He just laid off a 3-yard pass to Sanchez with 3 people around him, and basically they dispossessed him and ran away. And I thought to myself, you're meant to be one of our leading lights. That is the moment at 2-1 where you step inside and you smash a shot towards the goal. But he is so deferent. And when people talk about him going missing, I always want to defend him. But all it takes is just a step inside. You've got the runner, 3 people going one direction. Step inside and hit it. And he takes a deferent option. And I think we really got to sort this out, because that's stopping us from really getting to the next level. And I know he has great games. I'm not trying to pick any individual apart, because the investment that City have made, I think they've got 13 clubs around the world in their global system. The amount of money they spent on their training ground alone, on their academy alone. They're in a different stratosphere to us, backed by a country. We all know the pound note differential. But when it comes down to we've got some pretty high quality players in our team as well. And what you hope for is just a level of, this is my moment, I'm going to seize it. And I just didn't feel that. I felt we were a little bit reticent and deferent in how we played. And that was the comparison that I noted. And so, yeah, it's just, I'm disappointed, but I am not going to be massively surprised because this actually, sadly, is our level, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and that, again, the reason I started the pod the way I did is because I think whatever debate and discussion we have, or argument, or screaming fight, or knife fight, or whatever we have about this game is in the context of a competition that we acknowledge was not one where we expected to be equals on the day, and maybe isn't the best measuring stick for where we are. And honestly, maybe that's handicapping us more than we deserve. Maybe that's giving us a little bit too easy a ride, because you have to ask, how far away from City should we expect to be? But they really are a top side on top form with a top manager and a top organizational structure, and it is what it is. Paul, why don't you add on what Clive was discussing, though, and maybe if you could, I kind of want to touch on where we lost the game in midfield a bit, because as Scott's stat section kind of pointed out, the midfield touches is where we were really overwhelmed, and once again, the Ramsey-Xhaka partnership, which we've focused so much on, did not seem to be able to cope in midfield, whereas in games like against Chelsea, for example, they've done much better.
Yeah, bingo. We talked about kind of spilling the ball in our third, trying to play out, turning the ball over, and at the end of the day, I'm going to say something I don't want to be misinterpreted. When Jack Wilshere came on, you suddenly saw the answer. And I don't mean that it's Jack Wilshere, but because he came on at a time where maybe City were starting to relax. And I don't think Jack right now is the answer. Maybe he will be in a few months if he keeps going. But you kind of saw what he can do that Cazorla can do. Takes the ball, turns, breaks the line, spins a player, and suddenly he's on the other side of them. Something none of our midfielders are even close to doing. Ramsey's probably the closest in that he can do a give and go and sprint ahead, but it's hit and miss. Xhaka can't. Both of them seem
I think that was an 80s song, right? Or
yeah. Yeah. So, again, I don't want to... This isn't to the baying wolves who say Wilshere's the answer. I would love him to be. There was a time when he might have been, and maybe there's a time when he will be. I don't think that time's now, but you saw that 10 minutes, what he could do against maybe a slightly relaxed, slightly tired City. So it was maybe a little bit of a false read, but what we've seen Cazorla do so often in the past.
Yeah, well, he was the answer. We know that.
Around.
Yeah. And now he's got a piece of his arm attached to his ankle. So
tragic.
I mean, that's not a good sign.
Fucking tragic.
Yeah.
Only at Arsenal.
Yeah.
I thought we'd exhausted all of that with like the Wilshere, Ramsey,
Eduardo Diaby
stuff. Yeah. But oh my God, we found a whole new angle. Poor old
he literally
Santi
has his arm tattoo on his ankle.
Yeah, I haven't followed it too closely. They grafted on one of his children onto his ankle. Is that right?
Yeah, it's just disturbing. Tim, so I mean, it is funny. There's a screenshot going around, and I'm loath to use screenshots as being too much of a reference, right? Because they're just a moment caught in time, and they can be misleading. But there is an interesting screenshot making the rounds of 5 of our attacking players standing in a line directly across the pitch. Have you seen it?
And
it
there've been a lot like
yeah.
that recently.
Well, that's my point. I mean, does it seem to you that like just Arsene Wenger's teams used to make these pretty triangles, right? And to be fair, any 3 points makes a triangle, but like unless they're in a line, to be fair. But you know that to me is what seems so obvious is the old Arsenal that could make these triangles and ping it, to each other. You could break a press that way. What is it really just as simple as the technical quality isn't there? Is it about movement and understanding where to be to help your teammate? What's missing that we don't seem to be able to play out of the back quickly and on the first touch, especially when teams press us or contest the midfield?
Yeah, it's a bit of all of those things. So, I mean, what's happened is we've lost all of the players that can do that. Mikel Arteta, Santi Cazorla, Thomas Rosicky, Jack, all of our kind of technical players who are able to do that have gone. We've got like half a Jack Wilshere left, and not to rake over old ground, but for some reason Arsene Wenger decided not to try and replace any of them, which thought at the time was madness, and everything I've seen since suggests it's madness. We don't have that real focal point in midfield. Like Xhaka and Ramsey, it's an all right midfield combination, but really it's not. You know, it's not of the quality of the sorts of midfield combinations that win you the league. Look at the way, you know, Man City are kind of a benchmark here. Fernandinho, Silva and De Bruyne. That's quite cavalier and that's quite attacking, but there are 3 points of a triangle there and they all do quite different things, but they're all interconnected. With Arsenal, we don't have that technical focal point. We lost it when we lost Cazorla, and we haven't tried to replace it for reasons that I really wish someone would ask Arsene Wenger in a press conference why he didn't consider that a priority this summer, because I think it's so obvious it was such a massive priority. So not only is the technical the technical level not there, but we empty our midfield. You know, and we've spoken a bit about Ramsey moving forward too quickly, and you know, Xhaka's not the guy. I mean, and it's kind of unfair on Granit Xhaka, but Xhaka is also not the guy who's gonna, like, he's not Fernandinho, you know, or Casemiro. That's not who he is. He's not that guy that's going to hold the midfield together. He's a deep lying playmaker. You know, Xabi Alonso is a deep lying playmaker, but look at who he always had next to him. He had Vidal or Mascherano. Or someone like that, you know, he wasn't just left on his own. And yeah, I think it happens with a lot of our players, where basically, and I see this all the time from where I sit at the Emirates, is that there's no sense of build-up. There's no sense of having two lines. So, and I spoke about this about the first half of the Swansea game. So every time Swansea cleared the ball, we didn't have that second line of midfield to, right, we're taking the ball back and we're penning you in. It was just everyone was up front, and then when Swansea cleared the ball, we were on the back foot. There's no patience in that team. Everyone just goes and stands up front, or they just wait for Alexis to take the ball and do something with it. There's no... Yeah, there's no.
You don't want your players on plane, right? You want them to progress up the pitch in a logical way, so that you have options forward, backward, laterally. And our players are just sort of like on plane, either in defense or in attack.
And listen to something Pep Guardiola said about a week ago. I think I didn't get the context or the question, but he said something like a backwards pass is really brave because it's the first step to a better move. But we don't have like a backwards pass. We don't have this sense of that's the first line of attack.
Well, I can think of an El Neni backwards pass that maybe I wouldn't recommend again.
And to be fair to Coquelin, he has a negative PPVA.
Which means he passes backwards a lot? No, actually it means he loses the ball a lot.
Oh, damn it.
It means he passes to the guy sitting in the front row. But yeah, so there should be like almost like a dotted line, like Xhaka, your deep lying playmaker, then there's Ramsey, then there's Özil, then there's Alexis, then there's Lacazette, and they should be a bit more, staggered so that you can see a dotted line through the picture where you build the play. But instead what happens is either Xhaka gets the ball in the centre circle and everyone just runs up front and waits for him to boot it forward.
All you can see is backsides.
Yeah, or they just wait for Alexis to drop back and then see if he can thread the eye of a needle, and he'll try it 15 times in a game and it will work once. It's a really terrible way to try and play football, and it's Arsene Wenger's teams have often been technical to a fault, and I think that's why this isn't picked up on, because people still have this stereotypical view that Arsenal is a team of little elfish playmakers, and it's not. We don't even have we have one in Özil, we have none in our midfield, we have none sitting on the bench. But people still think it's like 2008 and we're this team of wayfish players. And, this is an Arsene Wenger team that doesn't have any technicians, and it's astounding. It's a really shapeless midfield. And people ask what sort of team is Arsenal? Well, a team usually gets its identity from its midfield, and Arsenal's midfield is the absolute embodiment of the whole team in that it doesn't have an identity.
Well, it's one person.
It doesn't really exist.
It's one guy. It's Granit Xhaka. I mean, but we could make a hell of a long and pretty hilarious YouTube compilation of Arsenal players receiving the ball and all their teammates running away from it like it's a grenade. I mean, you see Xhaka get the ball, and literally players are sprinting out of the picture to get away from it. It's bizarre. The linking play. Before we move on from midfield, Clive, you wanted to come back on. By the way, Can I just ask you guys a quick rules-based question? Because I do think the refereeing is an issue. We don't discuss it on this podcast because we think, by and large, it's boring. Everyone can go on Twitter and say, boo-hoo, the referees hate us. We don't need to do that here. But are we running into a problem? Sandy Cazorla does want to come back and play for us. If he receives it on his right foot, is he going to get called for handball? Because that could potentially be a huge problem. All right, Clive, on the center midfield,
By the way, I thought the referee was starstruck on the day. I thought he read too many headlines, and I think he was overly impressed with Man City, and that's how the game went. On centre midfield,
he didn't have a good day. And I'm going to say something I don't usually say, which I think the offside goal did change the game. And even though we may not have deserved to get a result, I think we were in the game in a very open period of the game and as likely to score as they were in that moment. So I do think it changed the game. But it's hard to say on balance we didn't get what we deserved. But finish up on center midfield. I want to talk Ozil and Alexis briefly.
Yeah, I think, obviously, we've spoken about the hub and spoke one-man midfield. City do it up to a point, but they keep their distances smaller. And what I like about them, they're slightly more positionally aware. So De Bruyne really has that inside right channel and David Silva inside left. They know their roles. They got their V shapes and that's it. And they can combine and they can build. They've got speedsters out wide and they know those guys are going to make runs. So they give them the ball. It's choreographed, right? Sane likes to run through lines. Sterling has developed that run in his game. He used to be a dribbler. More so now, he takes it through the line or sprints through the line, and he challenges people. He makes early runs. In the first half, did a big diagonal from Delph, and he went in behind, went out for a goal kick, and Sterling puts his hands up and says, "Thank you. That's me now. Run my man back." It's choreographed what they're doing, and what we do, I'm afraid we are quite forceful. We push high. What's the point of pushing Bellerin high if you're not going to play him in? What's the point of Ramsey running high if we haven't got secure possession?
I think you'll find it's much harder to concede a counter-attacking goal if you don't have your team way up the pitch.
Yeah, well, that's the point. Yeah, well, what's the point of having both wing-backs high when we haven't got secure possession? And I did actually feel a bit sorry for Granit Xhaka because he looked exhausted running around that midfield, doing doggies, trying to capture people. When he does get the ball, he's massively fatigued and his technical security is going to be less. I just think when he gets to the big games, you got to have a more serious game plan. You got to have shorter distances, and that's where we see the limits of our players. And then we see players that haven't got the rounded skills that we've spoken about many times before. And I have to say, I think Tim's absolutely right. We have got some quite poor technicians in the centre of the pitch. So we have to decide how we're going to play. If we're not going to play in midfield, then let's not do that. Let's disconnect and play the Italian style and go 4-3-3 and let the three up front do it. But I miss the midfield out. But we haven't quite got the style. We haven't got it defined. And our players are not strong enough technically identity-wise to define our style for us. And so when we get pressured by the very best teams, we see this team that we're not quite sure what we just saw and what we represent.
No, it's kind of hard to argue with that. And again, always with the caveat that we understand that this is a unique situation. And Paul, one of the things that was problematic on this day is, look, especially if you're not going to play Lacazette and you're going to bring a Iwobi in there and you want to try to be a little bit more energetic and more physical and maybe have the extra body in midfield, it's even more incumbent on Özil to find a way to influence the game. And maybe that's unfair, but he didn't. He was really, really poor. And I'm not saying that Alexis wasn't, but I think Alexis had arguably the even harder job isolated up front, at least for the first 60 minutes or so. How disappointing is Ozil's performance on the day? And not just that, but at what point do you have to wonder about the mentality of this player, the capability of this player, that he just does not seem to be able to influence games where we're really challenged?
Well, he just looks like a player who, if you're not the dominant team in possession, it just doesn't work for him. Grading him on a curve, I actually thought he was quite committed in this game for Özil. I think he was genuinely trying. I just don't think he doesn't like that level of pressure and pressing around him. He doesn't thrive in it. Being on the same pitch with De Bruyne, that's not a good look for him, not a good comparison. You see the two things in particular that De Bruyne does that he doesn't, which is the graft and work rate on and off the ball, and the fact that he can actually take a shot without trying to pass it into the net, and that he's a goal scorer. So,
but Joe, what about just the weird lack of even technical accuracy? Like he wasn't passing as accurately. He was horrendous. I mean, Scott brings up in his stats section that he was 50% on passes in the final third when he averages 90%. He's one of Europe's best final third passers. I mean, that's worrying. But as I listen to that, I'm thinking, well, stats are great, but it's all about interpretation. I think that purely tells you how much pressure. There's a reason Alexis and Özil were particularly loose with the ball and particularly inefficient, and that's by the time they got into the final third against City, it was generally in circumstances in which, the City's structure was actually in place, and the passes. Özil isn't just going to make any old pass. He's going for key passes and more aggressive passes, and that's when he's at his best. But unfortunately, the odds were against him in terms of defensive positioning and spacing, and then our own structure when we got there. He didn't have that much to hit, and he had a lot of pressure on him, and I think that explains his numbers. I don't think he was particularly bad for him. He just looked particularly bad. And yes, it's still an indictment that he's only a player that really suits a team that's dominating possession, or if they're counterattacking as Real Madrid used to be with him in the team. They're doing it from a position of structure and control, and they're running the game. Even if he doesn't have to have all the possession, he just needs to have good possession, where he's the guy picking the hole in their defense. Well, that wasn't there to be had in this game, would be my reading of it. Yeah, and I sort of wonder if Iwobi's going to tuck in a little bit and maybe drop into midfield a bit, and the only guy up front is Alexis. If maybe Özil doesn't
kind of a giveaway.
It almost makes you wonder if, not to bring up the Lacazette thing, but you go Lacazette and Alexis almost as a two up front, and drop Iwobi more into midfield, and because there's not much of a role for Özil in the way he lined up then, and that's giving Özil a bit of a pass. Tim, as they got to the end of the game, I mean, after the Giroud goal, the game got really stretched, and it opened up a lot, and I felt that we looked like we had our best opportunity, and then the offside goal came, and then the manager did something interesting. He brought on Giroud. He moved Lacazette out wide. I mean, I realize at that point the game is probably beyond us, but did the subs he make kind of make you shake your head? That's like, oh, Arsene, now you're just throwing on attackers to throw on attackers. I mean, do you think there was a good sort of tactical philosophy behind what he did, or that it really was just get every attacker he has on the pitch?
I think it was a little bit get every attacker he has on the pitch, which actually quite often works for him. Usually against lesser sides, though. I think on this occasion you could make an argument for it in that he clearly felt that the channels were where he could get Man City, and in many respects that was vindicated with the goal. The goal came in the channel to Lacazette, a position he could avail of coming from wide. Our best chance before that came from the channel when kind of Ramsey got into it. So he obviously felt if there was a weakness in the City defence that particular area was it. And if you've got Lacazette out wide, he can still do some damage in that area. That said, I don't think that there was that much of a tactical kind of thought behind it. I think that was kind of more of a fringe benefit, and it was, let's just get all the attackers on. And in many respects, I've got some sympathy with doing that in most games that we're not winning, to be honest, because as we've just discussed, we don't have much of a midfield anyway, and we usually just end up with 5 people standing in a line. So they might as well all be strikers, to be honest with you.
well, that sounds healthy and perfectly normal. Yeah.
So I the game really was done at that point. So I didn't think an awful lot of it, but yeah, it was probably worth a try. When I first saw Giroud was coming on, I was thinking, oh great, this is exactly what you want against a high line, where kind of running into the channels is kind of a good option. But actually, when it was like, well, I suppose Lacazette's there and Alexis is still there, so we're not really losing any of that. And I probably better Giroud than Walcott at the moment. So yeah, why not?
Yeah. So Clive, I mean, here's the problem. We do wind up losing this, and so be it. I think that was kind of the expectation. I mean, maybe in retrospect, you'd like to go back and just put the strongest 11 out there and say, well, we knew we lost it the first time. Let's see what happens with the best 11 guys we have out there. But the second guessing doesn't really change the fact that they are beyond us, and that's fine. But we have Spurs coming to the Emirates right after the international break. It's easy after these big game losses to want to rip everything up and start from scratch. And yet, ultimately, a lot of the statistical models had us as the fourth best team in England prior to this game. And aside from the Liverpool match and this match, statistically speaking, we've performed reasonably well. Having said that, we do have 4 away losses, and I think we've conceded something like 16 or 19 goals. What is it? Is it 16 goals? Something
yeah,
bad.
I think so, yeah.
So my question to you is simply, does he just go back to that best first 11 for the derby and say, I'm not drawing any conclusions from this City game? Or do you think this starts sort of a cascading spiral of tinkering where he kind of loses the feel for this squad and potentially becomes a bit of a rut?
I hope he goes back to that stronger team. I think we get Welbeck back. I think we get Mustafi back. I think we get Chambers back as well into the squad after international break. So maybe, I'm not sure if he's going to play Mustafi. I hope he's fit enough and does play. And we just play our football. Right? And the midfield thing is an issue. I thought I saw a great line. I think it's from that Charlie Watts guy on Football London. He says that Arsenal play football without a safety net. And that really is highlighting our midfield. We basically are so risky in there. And it works against the lesser teams and against the better teams. Every mistake is punished and we have no ability to recover. Spurs are quite quick on the transition. I don't know if you've noticed. They're quite athletic. They're quite big. They're quite fast. They're much faster than us. They're quite interested to see what we do. You know what we're going to do, didn't you? We're going to have Xhaka at the base. We're going to probably spend 2 weeks with Arsenal fans arguing, should Jack Wilshere play there? Well, last time I looked, he's not a sprinter of the big distances, so good luck with that. So I think we just I don't think we've got any choice. Well, I don't mind losing our way. I don't mind losing with our best players. I'd like to see them play better, like every fan would, but I'd just like to see us play the Arsenal way, and like we saw at Everton, and like we've seen from many of the home games in patches. So, do Spurs worry me? Yeah, they worry me a little bit because they're quite efficient in our box. But
well, and they press, and we haven't handled a press well in quite a while.
Exactly, they play off our mistakes, and but they're not technically supreme either. They just sprint, they just run, and they just hit areas. I'm not buying the aura of these teams. It's up to us to have a solution to play against them, but play a bit more discipline and play with a little bit more tactical maturity, and don't show your shorts to the person in the ball all the time running forward into areas where you can't receive the ball.
Yeah, show them your feet. How about that?
Yeah, exactly. Show them your boots. That's exactly one of the lines I use when I'm doing my coaching. Let the player on the ball see your boots.
I can't tell you how many times
what are you doing?
On Sunday, a player received the ball with no one to give it to, no angle to pass, and that is happening way too often. Clive, do you think he will go back to that 11, or do you think it's tinker time?
I think he's probably. It depends on the pressure and the heat. He may. I hope he does. It's a home game, and I think we are starting to see some little patches of fluidity with our strongest team. But you know what? I need to get closer to it. I need to see what actually happens and what the vibes in the media are, because he does listen to them. I felt he listened to them. I thought he got a little bit tentative, and I think he made a decision that he didn't need to make. I will say he was very unlucky to lose the captain. for illness, and then lose Holding with an injury. None of us saw that coming on the morning of the game. So, and that unsettled things a little bit. Although Coquelin tried manfully.
Well, not to mention, by the way, Coquelin's big quality is his energy, but he had just played a full game on Thursday. So
yeah, exactly. He done his best
in midfield.
But what he's not good at, and what you need to be good at in that centre position, is you need to want the ball, you need to show for the ball, you need to create angles to receive it. And what he likes to do is hunt the ball, go get the ball, but he doesn't want to receive it too much in open spaces, right? So he likes receiving it in the crowd. He can pop it off quickly and sprint out of the hole.
Well,
he doesn't really want to.
The problem with that, Clive, is if your central defender does not want to receive the ball in the center of the pitch, then the only option is out wide. Your first option. Yeah. And if your first option is out wide, where's the easiest place to press the ball? Out wide, when you have the benefit of the touch line.
It can be. Once you realise someone that doesn't want the ball, you don't go and mark him. You go and double up on Iwobi, you double up on Xhaka, and suddenly they're under pressure. If you've got another person that wants the ball, and what Arsenal are very good at with their back three, they don't have anybody who doesn't want it. So our back three are all ball players. They normally receive it and want to play. And so you don't have like your Smallings in there who don't want the ball. You know, Jones, who's terrible on the ball. You know, even Gary Cahill's not great on the ball. With Arsenal's back three, they might not be the most robust, but they can all play. And so we start to circulate possession and we start to get a breather. I think it was really noticeable in this game that we weren't able to do that. So if we get our back three players back who can all keep it, then we can then execute in our moments of possession. We're going to need to do that against Spurs, and Spurs are going to wait for a mistake. They're going to trap for a mistake, and we need to be secure. Are we secure? Nope, not at the moment, but we can all hope that that we're more secure than we were against City.
I want to finish real quick with each, Paul and Tim, just one last quick thing. So, Paul, real quick to you. Is there an argument, and again, I see every point that you're making about why to rest Lacazette or what the manager's plan is long-term, but if we accept for the moment that maybe Arsene Wenger's strength isn't specific game-by-game tactical preparation, that Arsene Wenger is good at squad building, that he's good at talent development, that he has a good philosophy that is more of a holistic philosophy than a game-specific philosophy, if we believe that, and I certainly do, then isn't the argument that you put your most talented 11 players on the pitch because the odds that you're going to get it right playing game-by-game tactics are lower than the odds that your most talented players will figure it out on the pitch? I mean, is that the argument for just going back to that best 11 for Spurs and kind of riding it from there?
No, I think you're getting way out of line off one game. And if the concern is, oh my God, he might do it again for Spurs, he won't. Lacazette will start against Spurs. Spurs were playing at home. Spurs aren't City. In the past, he has made accommodations for playing Spurs away from home. So I would say, relax, let's not panic. Your definition of our best 11 will be the 11 that plays against Spurs.
I'll take it.
I'm still fine with the lineup we had.
I get that.
For the reasons we already explained, I just think let's cool our jets. It's the next game, but it's 13 days away. He won't have his Coquelin issue. He just didn't want to take too many issues all over the park. He went for a safer bet upfield. He'll go back to your definition of our best 11 against the Spurs team would be because that's on our territory. And if he really doesn't feel we can play our game at home, well, then I think he will think just as we would think, what the fuck are we up to?
Then what are we doing? Yeah, and by the way, Paul, I mean, I want to be clear. If he had brought Iwobi in for Özil, for example, and played Lacazette up front, it's not that I think he can't rotate or that I think it was the most stupid thing ever. I think the specific change didn't suit the situation, and I realize that's a lot of hindsight being 20/20 there. So, Tim,
but I think I explained just quickly. I think I explained why I get why he didn't want to play the three up front. You do,
yeah.
And you also made a comment about, well, two of those guys are off anyway. Well, they're not. They're not off for the whole rest of this season. And if we start acting like, oh, well, Ozil and Sanchez are off anyway, so why not drop them?
You misinterpreted it. I was saying that I think the argument was made that Lacazette was the easiest one to drop. And I was making the point that if you're protecting the egos of the two guys who don't have a future at your club instead of the one who is the future of the club, that might be an incorrect calculation psychologically.
Sure,
that's all I was saying.
But I think it was a valid comment, but it's not the egos he's massaging. It's you can't treat your 2-star players any different just because they're not going to be with you at the end of the season. You have to keep them on board.
You have to keep them on board for the season. I agree with that. No argument there. I mean, Tim, so then just two things real quick. One, is it a little worrying that maybe a loss in a big game like this, admittedly as good as City are, is producing sort of a collective shrug more than the usual meltdown? I mean, should we be a little worried that we don't see this as a cause for complete disastrous meltdown?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a friend of mine was making a point on Twitter today. I didn't necessarily agree with the angle. He was talking about the decisions that went against us, and he was saying the fact that there's so little kind of outrage, shall we say, about it kind of says that people are pretty apathetic about it. And I don't get me wrong, so I think it's right that there's no outrage, because I just think it's so boring and OTT now, the way people get stuck into referees. I think it's very unfair as well. But at the same time, I think he's got a point. Ordinarily, football fans, I don't think that's how most football fans think. I think most of them do get upset and outraged over decisions that go against their team, and there hasn't been much of that. And there is a kind of a bit of a feeling of apathy. And one of the things I've been thinking of, I've said it on a few pods now about how important it is to finish in the top 4 this year at the expense of everything else. And the thing is, I feel like the fans just aren't on board with that. Not necessarily because they don't agree, but they're just not engaged. They're not interested by it. They've seen, over a decade of fourth or die, and they just not invested in it anymore. And that's just the reality. I think a lot of people feel perhaps a little bit hopeless about the direction that Arsenal are going in, and that they're just not massively engaged. And I think, in the away end on Sunday, there was a massive air of resignation from definitely from the first goal onwards. But I'd say even before that, most people, I really got the feel that most people went there really expecting that we'd lose. Some people thought that we'd get thrashed. I think that is a concern. Don't get me wrong. There's a big part of me that thinks that, Man City are so much better, and they bloody well should be for the money they've spent. And I think Man City and Chelsea, for the money they've spent between them, I think both of those clubs have underachieved.
What about United?
But
I mean, come on.
Yeah, indeed. Although at least United, with Ferguson, I know they've got loads and loads of money as well, but they were still holding their own with those clubs, which, I think Chelsea and City should have done more for what they've spent. But that said, that doesn't mean I think we shouldn't be a bit closer, basically. So I think we should be able to give them a game and, maybe ultimately not win it. But, I do think that's a concern overall. But, that's where we are.
Yeah, that's where we are, and maybe that's where we should leave it. It's a big game right after the international break, which is always a little tricky. Maybe we're a little lucky with the players who don't have fixtures or don't have a lot of fixtures to worry about, so that should be a little easier. And I think, look, if we can just write this off as a one-off, and if the manager can do it and the players can do it, and we go back to what was working and we get our season on track with a win in the derby, I actually think it's fine, and I think you just move on from it. The problem is with the derby coming up, if you can't get a result there, I think the tinkering starts. I think the squad starts to run into some trouble, and then it becomes interesting, because Arsene is not necessarily the firefighter he once was. So we'll see what happens. In any event, Tim's on Twitter at Stillberto. Thanks, Tim.
My pleasure as always.
Thank you. And Paul's on Twitter at Pause in My Pants. Always a pleasure, Pause. Thanks.
Woohoo!
Woohoo indeed. And Clive's on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Thanks, Clive.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the 2 weeks away. it's 2 weeks to shit yourself for the derby, which God knows that'll be fun. In any event, we'll be back to break down all the things that went right in our 5-2 victory in that match after it happens. Until then, enjoy your time away.